Welcome everyone. Since we are a couple of minutes late, we will straight away dive into the topic. My personal belief is that poets who take their calling or their vocation in an old-fashioned way uh, can't ever afford to be apolitical. So I wonder whether any of these poets here have written anything that's not political. In some way or the other, they address the political and the cultural issues. And sometimes they have to focus more on craft or style, and they will have to underplay the political aspect. Um, and I think all of you are activists of sorts as well. Doesn't necessarily have to be political activism, it can be cultural or artistic activism. So can you briefly reflect upon your process? I was recently reading Exquisite Cadavers by Meena, and in the beginning, she makes a statement, about, it's a book which actually combines the writing process and the work, quite similar to what Kutsi has done earlier. In his Diary of a Bad Year. So as a starting point, and I'm referring to this, she promises that it's not going to be political, and she promises that it's not going to be about her family, that's the personal, but she breaks the rules after a few pages. So I think that itself, is a statement that, no matter how hard you try, you will never succeed in writing anything that's not political. So I would like to know whether you have ever in your writing career, any of you, written anything that's not political, and then you can perhaps start speaking about your process and read one or two poems, and then let the poems create a space in which we can widen the scope of the discussion. So starting with Meena.
When I started writing poetry, it was because I had joined this small NGO right after school, and they were publishing a magazine called The Dalit, and it was all about, the kind of atrocities that was going on, but also how are you going to preserve history, how are you going to, look at all of this. So it was, the work itself was very political, and but somehow for me, writing the NGO style report or writing, something like a news item or being part of a fact-finding team, I didn't know where to put my anger, I know where to put my thoughts, I know where to put my ideas, but I did not know where to put the anger and where to put the hurt. And I think that's why I started writing poetry very much, I think, just 20 years ago, very much as a young person, but just to keep it to myself, because you don't know what to do with these extra residual emotions that you have, which are not part of the work, but which, deeply move you. And I never saw that I would have, any semblance of life as a poet or somebody who publishes the poetry, because it seemed like something that came as an excess, something that came as a byproduct of what you were doing and not what you were doing in and of itself. But life has this strange way of taking its own course, and then poetry itself becomes such a radical space to operate from and to express yourself. So that kind of became my mainstay. I just briefly answer your question: is it possible to ever write something that's not political as a poet? I think it's possible for a lot of poets, because I do read much of poetry. But I also think that in some ways, whether the poet likes it or not, their work becomes, because of the times we live in, it becomes a very political text. So for me, the most recent book is a translation of the Tirukural, and it's a 2,000-year-old text. And obviously the Tirukural, the part that I have translated is the love poetry of the Tirukural. So in some ways you look at it and you're like, this is just love poetry, this is just romantic poetry. But the Tirukural itself is this very political text, and what part of the Tirukural is very political? I think it's because this is a classic text from 2000 years ago, but it says, Pirapokkum ella uyirkum sirapova seidoril vetrumayan, and right at the heart of it, it says, everybody is the same in birth. And so the text becomes this rallying point for anti-caste activists, for Dravidian ideologists, for Tamil nationalists, for people opposing Hindi Sanskrit supremacy, for people opposing Brahmanism. So a normal text, like, one single line of poetry just transforms the text. And because the text is seen as an anti-caste text, because it's seen as a political text, then the love poetry in that text, then how do you see that? You see that as, very democratic love poetry, a love poetry that doesn't talk about family structures, a love poetry that's, looks at the women and the man as absolute equals. So I think that's how poetry resonates. I'll let the others answer.
Definitely a big thanks to Mathrubhumi for having these sessions, because these are important conversations. I don't know for whom, but at least for the poets to have among ourselves. So, because this is what we live day in, day out, and I was telling Meena that it's too early in the morning to cough blood over breakfast. This session is so heady in the morning, so thank you for beginning with love and a sense of equality in that sense and her work. And I'm also happy to be with two panelists whose work I really adore and like, and Jose I just met. I want to begin with, great context of politics. Forget poetry. What is apolitical? What is not politics? What you're wearing is politics. What you're eating is politics. What your choice of words is politics. The way you're thinking right now that he's sitting there, is he credible enough to speak on this, is politics. Everything is politics. And being apolitical itself is a political stand. So I don't know where we go with that. So the moment you're born, you're into politics. So we can't help that part. And I was telling I'm bad at speaking, so I'll just go with opening maybe with a poem and saying that this is a poem. Even poetry is scary. Even poetry is, I don't know why. And you can always find tropes like poetry doesn't sell, poetry that people don't read, blah, 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 and everything. But deep down, as she's saying, years, like centuries, there's folklore poetry. Fishermen go out singing poetry. There are farmers singing poetry. And our tradition has been that sort of oral. So are we still scared of poetry is the question. And there's a poem I read out at UN headquarters at an emergency writers congress on 13th May. Shehan was there. He's not here. Shehan was there and Salman Rushdie was there. And it was organized by PEN America. And I'll read that poem because this comes from the context that recently in the past year, Mia poetry is something that emerged in Assam, Mia literature, Mia being Muslim, and people were questioning and debating that, do we need additional literature? And why would we write them off as the question at the first? So are you scared of poetry? Let me begin there probably. And a Mia writing poetry, a poem from a Dalit, the song of an Asur, an Adivasi who can rhyme, LGBTQI plus poems, poems by women poetry groups secretly meeting and writing poetry in Kabul, social media poetry, unpublished poetry, bad poetry, in bracket, which is any poetry not written by you or your gurus or your chelas, poems by non-branded writers, poems which have not appeared or sold to you by big publishers, Vogue magazine and other market forces, poems by children and teenagers that you can brush off as immature, African American poetry, poems on atrocities, history and slavery, poetry by farmers, poetry in unknown languages, slam poetry, poetry you can't control, that this is not poetry. Or are you just scared? Or are you just scared that the truth will be heard?
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and all my colleagues here on the panel. Thank you very much for being together this morning. And I really thank Mathrubhumi and the curator Sebin for inviting me to Trivandrum. After a long time, I'm here. And so thank everyone, part of this festival, this grand, beautiful festival. Back here, the topic of poetry and politics. And I agree with my fellow panelists here. What is this political here? If poets are not political, then who will be political? And what will be political? But let me begin with a little, conceptual clarity about, politics and political. I guess, by nature, I'm not essentializing the craft of poetry, but poetry is unannounced satyagraha, civil resistance. That's the nature of the poetry. Politics could be different, politics could be opportunistic, politics could be power politics, and that's the reason, if you remember, Plato banished poets out of his ideal kingdom. Of late, Zizek has been talking about this Slovenian philosopher that, don't trust too much, too many poets. I guess, what he means that there are all kinds of poets doing all kinds of politics, including, politics of terror, xenophobia, authoritarianism, etc., etc. So political, by nature, what it means to be. And I'm using here some of the insights of the philosopher Hannah Arendt, referring to her iconic work, Natality. Natality means giving birth to possibilities. Possibilities of, of creating, freedom, possibilities of, resistance, politics. So all these possibilities, as Hannah Arendt eloquently spoke about, natality. So politics in this sense is about freedom, well-being, and the larger concept of, eudaimonia means, happiness. Good of all of us, including flora, fauna, and the earth. That's the space of the politics. And that is what political is all about, Political is not just about me and myself, and it's not about, what I do and what I read. Politics is all about integral to this, literary, landscape, this cultural landscape, making, from earth to heaven, everything making inclusive, So that's kind of a short note, just the entry point that we are all, in that sense, political, but politics could be different, I'm not referring to left wing, right wing, central, whatever, those levels of politics. But in this sense, if I remember correctly, coming from a generation on the street, like if you remember Pablo Neruda talking about blood on the street, And we have seen that, participating in the blood. In fact, I just published, edited 71 poets in solidarity. That's very political. And tomorrow maybe I will talk a little in detail about this, new book about 15 languages, 30 translators, 71 poets. And this solidarity is political by nature. Friendship, as Ambedkar rightly referred to, Maitri, that's political, So coming together and registering and thinking about natality, a future world of far more, inclusive world, more freer world, that's political. And in the sense, all of us, not just Pablo Neruda, and if you look at, Mahadevi Akka of late, in fact, here I've cited Mahadevi Akka, that what that political is about poetry. My Lord Jasmine, think about, Mahadevi Akka. And also, back here, Darvesh poetry, Aga Shahid Ali, deeply political, Kamala Das, deeply political, So we see that, whole idea of being political, and who will forget, Faiz Ahmad Faiz Sahab's Nazm, Ye Daag Uzala, Ye Sabe Gajida Shahar, Stain Light, where we have come, this freedom. This courage to challenge, certitude about life is about politics, is about being political, is about poetry. Or Rahat Indori Sahab, who just passed away, or Manglesh Tabral, I dedicated this book to Manglesh, who wrote a famous poem, Tana Shah. Who is this Tana Shah, comes to my house. And Rahat Indori, sabhi ka khoon hai Hindustan mein, kisi ke baap ka Hindustan nahi hai. I mean, he spoke about it, So this is something, I guess, when we talk about politics and poetry, we need to think about it. Poets could be in different camps, in different camps. But being political is about, unannounced satyagraha, a civil resistance, eternal, So let me, as my younger colleague has read a poem, so I will read a poem which is, let me see if I can get it. Just a moment. In fact, yesterday I met Sachidanandan, and what I was telling Sachidanandan that, sir, whenever I come to Trivandrum, I remember your poem, stammer. I started stammering. But the act of a stammer, the mode of a speech, makes me political. even stammering, and when the whole people start stammering, it becomes deeply political, deeply political. So I will read this poem. This poem is titled Mother's Tongue, Mother's Tongue. And I don't know whether it's a protest poem. There are genres. We are, resistance poem. But this is a poem about, about being political in multiple ways. Mother's Tongue. They came, found my mother. They came, found my mother, harvesting ancestral prayers in the arteries of the primitive Shiva temple. They came, found my mother, harvesting ancestral prayers in the arteries of the primitive Shiva temple. They cut her fingers, lips, ears, eyelids, devoured them in festal hunger. Seeing this, my unmarried sisters turned corpses. I collected their torsos in a large towel, washed them in the holy spring waters, packed neatly in my college rucksack. They again came back. There were no children, no wives, no food, but they insisted on eating. In disgust, I offered them cold and sticky pizzeria pieces of my mother's tongue and preferred to become a martyr without a language. Thank you.
I assume Meena will also read one of her poems, and while we wait for her to find a poem, you can also reflect on, all of you have traveled extensively, and I think Meena and Ashwani has taught as well. What about you, Mathu? Have you taught in any university? Yeah. Teachers, you are all teachers as well. Teachers, activists, poets, travelers. So how does this affect you? Does it influence your political stand? And one more question, when you are political, there comes a moment when people try to silence you. So what's your take on that? Are you willing to be silenced, or will you keep on speaking as long as you can?
Everyone's, the theme seems to be between Ashwani and Madhu about what's poetry, what makes poetry scary, what's the role of language. So this is an old poem, I think about 10 years ago I wrote this, maybe longer. It's called Once My Silence Held You Spellbound. You would not discuss me because my suffering was not theoretical enough. Enough. Now I am theoretical enough, I am theatrical enough. I have learnt all these big words. I can use them with abandon. I can misuse them. I can refuse them. I can throw them about, and one day I can throw them out. I am the renegade who can drop these multisyllable monsters for studied stylistic effect. I am the rebel who can drop them altogether. I invent new ones every passing day, and for your information, Oxford English Dictionary consults me. Roget's thesaurus finds it tough to stay updated. But because I use these bedeviling words the way you use me never means that I have stopped seething in anger, that I have stopped swearing. Thank you.
Perhaps Madhu can start speaking about it.
As you said, you cannot silence us, so we are going to keep reading rather than speak. Because that's the easy way out. But definitely, see, as I believe, and this whole conversation is beautifully choreographed because luckily Joe's also came late. We never got to have what we're going to speak about. So this is all organic and not orchestrated at all, even for a second. That's nice. And so I'm just going to keep saying whatever comes to mind. And because we were speaking of politics, of poetry, even before you get into a poet, being an artist, being any artist in the audience, on the dais, you have a space. Now that we have set the context that politics and poetry and things, art go hand in hand, what are you going to do with it? So let's say even I at least, being with an indie publisher helps. I'm sure with big publishers, you can't manage that. Or you can, I don't know if you have that weight to throw around. But see, I mean, I have a book cover. What do I do with it? how political can it get? So I don't even, because I have been a public health person also all my life apart from being a poet. And so let me use this space because I'm fed up of the term mother and child. And we have mother and child departments, we have mother and child whatnot. And I'm like, that's so easy once the baby is born, beyond 6 months of breastfeeding. I don't think there is any connect to the mother and the baby. And you're just shoving it onto her because, yeah. No, I'm saying, no, you get it. I'm saying men also. Like, so for me, I was caretaking. Like, no, I'm coming from the context of raising a baby. It's so easy to put it onto a woman to raise the baby. But that's not fair. So as what I was a homemaker for the longest time. So I took and put it, probably this might be one of the few covers that might be with a man holding a baby. And so my context from the public health angle is definitely that, and that's a stance I take. And let's say the other cover too. I mean, if we can zoom onto it, being non-essential is another cover that I worked hard on. So we work in solitudes and looking at what we are doing and the little space we have and what we can do with it. Like, let's say he's trying to zoom in right now, maybe. So the cover is being non-essential. So as you can say, it's a tic-tac-toe. So in the tic-tac-toe, we are the essence of time and nature. So being time and nature. And peace for us will not come from institutions, formal institutions, So that says peace, a constitution kind of thing, for which infinity art is essential. So there it goes, being non-essential. So it is a lot of work that gets into our solitude, lonely time, to look at the work we are doing, nuance it, with a lot of things. And so this poem comes from, the poem is called Song for the Tamil Nadu Farmers. And if you remember, at Jantar Mantar in 2017, even before the Kanakakunnu protests, I was there with Tamil farmers in Jantar Mantar, and let me read and you will get the context. So there's just one line in the poem that's Tamil. Sudugadu theriyame alayaranda sothukku. So it goes on to say, a crude translation would be not knowing where to get food from, he hangs around and not going into his grave. So something of that sort. It's a curse kind of, slang kind of thing. For the Tamil farmers who protested 41 days at Jantar Mantar in scorching summer of 2017. Dry fields are inflammable. On the charred road, asphalt and tar, behind the barricades at Jantar Mantar, farmers wither like crops in drought. People come, take pictures with them and leave. No Hindi, only Tamil. People come to take pictures of them and leave. No English, little English. People pretend autos, buses, vehicles pass by, Baba, politicians, activists, poets come and go. Government, corporate, road tars have no moral, although I have seen tar melt in Delhi's April heat. 60-year-old Nachamma, half naked, half dead, cries, there are no tears. If death is what lies ahead, then I would rather die protesting. The black breasts of clouds have dried up, the monsoon-fed mother Kaveri, who for centuries has nurtured the sky, raised pearls, tiger stripes, blood, and city of men like all mothers and daughters in history is dying. When the sky is barren, they borrow bore wells to pierce into the hard heart of the earth, find pain, dead dryness, starved cattle, sore skin, parched pulse, songs of sorrow without water. The land is now infested with predatory loan sharks. Sudugadu theriyame alayaranda sothukku. Why do you have clothes on you still? Why does your wife have a Mangal Sutra? A dirty bottle of river, polythene of cloud, a dead rainbow hanging from the rope. Are we dreaming of a rain that we have killed? Thank you.
I was just thinking about, political and what is more political, and just cautioning myself, because what is it about being silent, you know? What is it about silent, and can you afford to be silent? Is silent could be a mode of speech, you know. I play a lot with linguistic terrains, so I think about different kinds of speeches, you know. That's the advantage we have. I've just gone through 15 languages, and I was thinking about translating, you know, my dear good friend Robin, you know, when he translated the famous poem, I want to be killed by Indian bullet, you know. I don't know how it tastes, you know. I mean, like the very blood of the bullet, you know, which goes through you, rips you apart, and when you are in the insurgent mode, you know. And how many poets can afford to be? How many poets can welcome 7 inches to home and then wish to be killed by Indian bullet? That's political, you know. That's political. Not necessarily that we have to be scream, shout, I mean, like what I call, and caution, once again using Hannah Arendt, about the excess of politics, you know. I mean, like you have seen how dictators are all around the world, you know. All around the world, you know. And they have their own admirers. And never forget that, you know, Mussolini, Hitler supported by poets. I mean, they're kind of politics, you know. So here, you know, what I'm kind of, you know, thinking about and sharing with you very candidly and honestly, that being political must not become too accessible, you know, politics. If it enters into, perhaps, you know, there will be consequences, and there are consequences, you know. It could become instrumental. It could become easily a means to power politics, on tyranny, you know. So I will come back to that. And before, you know, maybe I share with you something which can reflect on how, you know, the love poems, right from, you know, Prakrit love poems, which Arvind Malhotra translated beautifully, how those Prakrit poems were so powerfully political, you know, And so I'm going to go and think about maybe back home, about rains, rivers, and rainbows. They are political too. So I will share with you a rain poem. I don't know whether it's a very sensual poem, and it's about rains and how rains could be political, you know. Not necessarily, you know, we are animate, so we are men, women, biological creatures have to be political. Even a drop of rain, a drop of tear could be political, though I shared this poem. And good here, I read wherever, you know, some rain happened. I mean, like it's rains. I mean, like the sky was already overcast, in Bangalore particularly. So this is a rain. And the title of the poem is A Book of Rains. A Book of Rains. For long, I come from, you know, a kind of tradition, a cultural and linguistic tradition where we all aim to write a book of rains, you know, book of rains. So here it is. These days, I long to write a book of rains. These days, I long to write a book of rains. Rains are like mural wounds from which happiness flows, is speaking to us in the same tongue, but in various languages of seasons. Humming in myriad sounds of wild geese in clear sky. Morning rains are seeds of life, pouring over women in parched lands who scramble to collect forgotten love songs in pots and pitchers. Afternoon rains are old poems on a blank page, turning docile, stammering at the knife point of murderers before they crawl back into sun-roofed mud houses for untimely siesta. Evening rains come in dancing figures, star-naked peacocks with sapphire anklets shiver in the fog's startled eye corner. The secret illusion of another sky bursting out on the distant indigo hills. Night rains are like embroidered brows of courtesans with rounded breasts, spurting incessantly into deep-throated cones, slaying fears of liaison with wild joys from moonlight till dewlight. A manna on my morning prayer mat sings, I am raining, I am writing, I am raining, I am writing. Thank you very much. That's political.
Thanks, Jules, for the question. I think we've traveled really far away from your original question, which is about travel and also teaching and what we see. Um, I just want to actually pick on what Ashwani said about insurgency and poetry, and also the broader title, which is about poetry as a political tool. And it's very interesting to talk about oneself. But for the last couple of years, I was translating the work of female fighters in the LTTE, or the Liberation Tigers, and or what they call the Tamil Tigers. And a lot of the women were poets, and it was very interesting to watch, because from the outside, when you look at the female fighter, when you look at the guerrilla, the general perception is that they were forced to join it, they were brainwashed, or these women, they just came to the tigers because they wanted protection. And very often the agency of the female fighter, the fact that they have their own agenda, the fact that they have their own political outlook, the fact that they are there, part of an armed movement to achieve something, I think that really got lost in the larger narrative about them, because we were so excited. In one sense, people were essentializing because they were women with guns, but they were also patronizing because they were women with guns. And nobody was looking at the extent of how did women choose to deploy violence. And then I really felt like, how do you understand what they were thinking? Because how do you prove this point? Like, you might know from anecdote, you might know from interview, but how do you really prove this point that they had a political purpose and they were not somebody else's puppets? And then I looked at their poetry. And I'm going to read a poem by someone called Captain Vanati. Captain Vanati possibly died in the Elephant Pass battle. She was hardly 23 when she died. And this is a poem for me in which it really looks at the connections between what it is to be part of a militant liberation movement, but also be an extreme feminist there. And then I'm going to come back in a second and talk about poetry as well. This is a poem she writes. She says, "Get ready for battle." This is addressed to other women. It says, "You who have become a refugee in your kitchen because of the storm of patriarchy, you waging a silent war with fire, get ready and come. Let your self-confidence grow and your courage too. Do you have any freedom to act on your thoughts and your desires? Family life does not exist for the have-nots now. This is what has continued into the 20th century. Like the dreams of someone mute, your emotions now run silent. You sob in the kitchen as you're being wrapped. Get ready and come away. Let us create a new era in the shadow of the guns we now carry. When we get national freedom that we desire so deeply, we will build the tomb for women's exploitation. We will dig the graves for society's backward ideas. For this revolution tomorrow, you must come today. Look, there in a flood of blood, your sister holding her gun out to you. Take her weapon, walk in her footsteps." So on the one hand, for me, this, not just this poem, but the entire body of work of Female Tigers, why were they using poetry? They could have just written a manifesto, they could have, addressed conferences, but in some ways, poetry became the way women were using it as an op-ed. They want to talk about superpowers, they want to talk about imperialism, they want to talk about patriarchy. Then poetry becomes the way in which, they're going to editorialize themselves. Poetry became the way in which they were, setting forth their manifesto. So poetry became a lot of things that society would not allow them to operate. Society would not put them in charge of the, intelligence wing, or society would not put them in charge of, even though they did a lot, but this is how they subversively found their own space, which is why I think that, women poets, especially guerrilla women poets, have been so spectacular in what they have done with poetry.
So now what you can do is you can talk about identities, your own identity, identity as an art collaborator or a researcher or an activist, a translator. Ashwani has a wonderful project called the Indian Novels Collective. Yeah. So all of you can talk a little bit about yourself and how your identity influences your politics.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep the momentum going, and thank you for speaking about something like that, because so that's what I'm saying. I mean, one session definitely would not even cover the surface of what we are trying to scratch here. But despite, as poets, as artists, as people who are searching for things. So yeah, I mean, one of the things I constantly get, many things, of course, every day, starting from the price of how expensive books are to buy by mainstream people, to the kind of very constricted space for indigenous writers and indigenous voices across India. So in my effort, I do also try to translate a bit of indigenous poetry from Northeast, indigenous poetry from Chhattisgarh and things like that. So here's a beautiful poet, Vandana Tete from Chhattisgarh. She writes about Soni Sori. If you remember Soni Sori, she was a teacher, but she was jailed as a Maoist and things like that. And the poem says, Jamun, I don't know if you know the fruit jamun, which is purple in color and small, and what do you call it in Malayalam? Nyaval. So the purple one. So her face was like that in jail, and Vandana probably writes about that. There's a translated version of her work. It's in Hindi. Your face has become a jamun, Soni. Your face has become a jamun, Soni. It looks sweeter now. It's extract, a cure for incurable diseases. They who made a jamun of you don't know. Don't you ever think your face is blackened? You are the daughter of a society where no face is ugly. We, the Adivasi women, are known to the government only through our bodies or for our warrior spirit. For centuries, our face is that of Surpanaka's sister, and the history is our noses hacked over and over by the Maryada Purushottam and his brothers. You have evolved like a jamun in full bloom. The jungles of the country are ablaze in your jamuni flame. Your jamuni face will change the bitter taste of the system. The future of this country will be sweet one day. So say the villages, so say the jungles, so says your jamuni face. Oh, we were speaking of identities, and I'll let Ashwani take over that. And
No, I won't take over, Taking over is political. I won't do that, Taking over, I mean, like on a lighter note, I'm bantering, I bantered a lot. Maybe that's the smiley, being a smiley is also political in these days, difficult days, of despair and all kinds of things. If you keep smiling, that also makes people uncomfortable, I mean, like if you are smiling a lot, and women know it better than men. I mean, like when they smile, and then their laughter, their laughter dictator doesn't like. And back here, what we do, and in the Novels Collective, as a co-founder, Sinjani is here. I mean, it's pretty much women's initiative. 5 years back, we set up this initiative in the Novels Collective based in Mumbai. And I'm very happy that a lot of people from languages, what we are trying to do, conceptually speaking, and in the sense of neutrality, the politics of language, you have seen that, how a particular version becoming hegemonic, and one language, perhaps one nation. I don't know, but that's also a politics that we need to be careful of. So we set up this, initiative, and the idea is from various languages of India. I just went to Goa in Konkani, working with, Damodar Moche, the Gyanpith awardee, and known for Carmelian novel. So we are translating classic novels from different languages. So that's bringing back plurality, multiversality, and a multifocal agenda of making the language space far more inclusive space, And that's where you can see voices, the voices of insurgents, tribals, and many other, voices that have been suppressed, Sometimes I don't give any name to a voice. I mean, like the identity. I mean, like, the very ability, this vocal cord ability, which is suppressed. When it starts open up, it becomes a language itself. that language itself. We haven't known those languages, you know. G.N. Davy reminds us that, you know, and why, why Rousseau didn't like, you know, the print language, the oral language. I mean, like, Malayalis know it better than me. I mean, like, the tradition of folklore, traditions, you know, everything has not necessarily to be printed, you know. There is a print capitalism. So to get out of that, so this is the initiative we are trying to do, and we also do, you know, readings, you know, take passages out, as T.M. Krishna recently has done, you know, Asokanitik, you know, picked up the text and read it, sung it, singing it. So that's what we do. So this is a nutshell, and we will talk more about tomorrow, and about the travel, you know, you are a traveler. And I would say that I have been traveling all over, you know, born in a little forest with 200 people around. You know, I always talk about, you know, playing with pygmy elephants, the tiger, and etc., etc. So I survived, and I'm here today. How long I would survive, I don't know, but the voice is here. So here is my book, you know, tomorrow. I will read from Banaras. It's a long epic political poem, but I call it is a travel poem. It is a cartographic poem. So travel itself is a very, very political act, you know. You face lots of consequences. Ask any refugee, immigrant, you know, read their poems, you know. So let me, you know, maybe how I'm going to sum up, you know, and, you know, remembering, you know, none other than Aga Shahid Ali. Of late, I'm missing him deeply. I mean, like the guy who perhaps gave a new voice, a new text and fabric to poetry in India and elsewhere too. So let me just say, you know, as I started from Faj Ahmad Faj, deeply sad about what we celebrate, freedom and the flag, Ye Daag Daag Uzala, Ye Stain. Let me conclude with this, quoting Aga Shahid Ali's famous poem, and I say this: and I Shahid, only am escaped to tell thee, God sobs in my arms, call me, smile tonight, at least tonight. Thank you very much.
I think one of the things about political, we talked a lot about nation state, we talked a lot about languages. We came very close to talking about motherhood, but I'm going to take it off the room. But one of the interesting things is also, like, you know, one of the basic places where a lot of politics plays is sexuality. And, you know, I don't want to be the only woman on the panel and talk about it, but basically all of the caste system is control of sexuality, which is how they manage to regiment us and keep us divided. And so I'm going to read poems in which, you know, and one of the ways in which all this regimentation, all of this control of sexuality breaks down is when women express desire, when women express who they are and what they want in life. And I think the Tirukural is very beautiful because, you know, there's so much the voice of the woman who wants love and who chooses what she desires. So I'm just going to, they're all very small, only 2-line poems. So I'm going to read from that. Kama kadal mannum unde adinindum yema punal mannumil. My desire is an endless sea. There is no raft to swim across safely. Kamamum nanum uirkava thungum yen nona udambin agathu. My life is torn between lust and shame, and this my frail body cannot bear. And this is one of my very favorite ones. Kama kadumpunal nindi karai kanen yamattum yane ulen. I swim the rough seas of sexual desire. I see no shore. In the dead of the night, I am alone. The last one. Inbam kadalmatru kamam agudadungal tunbam adinir peridu. Sex, its pleasure, a wordless word, a sea, its path leading to a pain even more immense. So thank you.